Learn Japanese history.
We are your navigators, Taro and Hanako.
Welcome. Today we're diving into a really fascinating time, the late Edo period.
That's right. Specifically, the Bunkabunsei era, early 19th century. People often call it the Kasei period.
And it's known for this incredible burst of culture, right?
Absolutely. A real time of energy that, set the stage for a lot of what came later in Japan.
One thing that jumps out is how the cultural spotlight seemed to move. It wasn't just Kyoto and Osaka anymore.
The Kamigata region, yeah. Increasingly, the focus shifted towards Edo, modern Tokyo.
So what was behind that shift? Why Edo?
Well, the main thing was Edo itself was just booming. Prosperity.
Economics.
Yeah, basically, you had this growing merchant class. They had money, they had some free time, and they wanted entertainment, art. That demand really pulled the cultural center eastward.
Okay, so you've got this flourishing cultural scene in Edo, but at the same time, the shogunate, the government, they were still pretty strict, weren't they? Keeping control?
Oh, absolutely. Very firm control over many things.
It feels like a bit of a contradiction almost. How did that vibrant culture happen under that control?
It is fascinating, isn't it? Despite all the rules and restrictions, you see this amazing rise in cultural activity among ordinary people.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder, why did the shogunate allow it? Or maybe they couldn't stop it. Perhaps there were economic benefits, or maybe just let off steam socially. Historians still puzzle over that.
That's a really interesting angle. So how did the average person actually get involved? It wasn't like they suddenly had loads of free time or...
Right. A key piece here was literacy. It was spreading.
How so?
We see more and more terakoya. These were like private community schools.
Not like official state school.
No, much more local, often run by, say, village officials or maybe Shinto priests, Buddhist monks. They taught reading and writing.
Wow. And that made a difference.
A huge difference. Suddenly, commoners could actually write things like waka poems or haikaikai. That's a kind of linked verse.
So they weren't just consuming culture, they were creating it.
Exactly. And, crucially, they could read novels. Imagine. That opens up whole new worlds. Information, stories, entertainment.
That's a massive shift from just listening to actually reading and writing. Okay, so putting Kasei culture in context, how does it fit into the bigger picture of the Edo period?
Well, the traditional view usually highlights two big waves. First, Jinroku culture.
Right, late 17th, early 18th century, Kamigata-based.
Exactly. Kyoto, Osaka, funded mostly by wealthy merchants. Then you get Kasei culture, early 19th century, which is what we're talking about, centered in Edo, driven more by the urban common folk.
So Jinroku is maybe the elite culture, and Kasei is when the ordinary townspeople really step up culturally.
That's a decent shorthand, yeah. That may be a bit simplified. More recently, historians have started talking more about the Horiki Tenmai period culture.
When was that?
Mid to late 18th century, kind of a bridge between Jinroku and Kasei.
A transitional phase. What was happening then?
Well, you start seeing new kinds of scholarship emerging, maybe questioning things a bit, responding to some instability in the shogunate. And you also see the early seeds of Katai trends in Edo's art and literature. So it wasn't like a switch flipped overnight.
Makes sense. Culture rarely changes instantly. So let's get into Kasei literature then. Novels became really big, you said. What were people reading?
Well, initially there were these books called sharebon. They were all about the pleasure quarters. Authors mostly saw them as just light entertainment. But they got banned during the Kasei reforms near the end of the 18th century.
Okay, so the government cracked down. What replaced them? What became popular after that?
Two main types, really. Kokataibon, those were comic books. And yomahan, which were more like, reading books, longer narratives.
Comic books? What were they like?
Kokaibon focused on funny stories about everyday townspeople's lives. The daily grind, but made humorous.
Any famous examples?
Oh, yeah. Jippin Shaiku wrote Tokaidochu Hizakuri, travels on foot along the Tokaido, hugely popular.
What was it about?
It's basically a comedy about these two guys from Edo traveling along the Tokaido Road, full of mishaps. It ran for like 21 years, starting 1802. Had sequels, too.
Wow, and people loved it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Especially because the early ones had illustrations. You can picture people just eating it up, bit of fun and escape. Like an old-time road trip comedy.
Sounds great. Anyone else significant in that kakibon genre?
Shigete Sanba. He wrote Ukiyo-buro, which means bathhouses of the floating world, and Ukiyo-doko, barbershops of the floating world.
So peeking into everyday places.
Exactly. Detailed, funny snapshots of commoners' lives in these social hubs. You really get a feel for the times from those books.
It sounds like these books really centered ordinary people's experiences.
They really did. Now, a bit later, in the early Tempo era, you get a brief burst of ninjobon. These are more about sentiment, romance stories.
Another trend.
Yeah, but they didn't last long either. Got banned under the next set of reforms, the Tenpo reforms. And one of the popular authors, Tamanaga Shunsui, actually got punished.
It seems like the shogunate was always watching what people read. But despite all that, you mentioned Yomion, the longer reading books. Did they stay popular?
Yes, especially the ones that had a strong moral message.
Hmm.
Kandenchoku, they called it basically. Virtue rewarded, evil punished.
Ah, stories with a lesson.
Right. And the absolute blockbuster in this category was Takezawa Beken's Nansa Satomi Hakkenden.
The Eight Dog Chronicles.
That's the one. The 8 Dog Chronicles of the Satomi Clan of Owa.
Uh-huh.
Massive story. It kept people hooked for about 30 years.
30 years. How long was it?
Over 100 volumes.
100? That's unbelievable.
It really tells you something about how many people were reading and how much they loved a long, engaging story.
Yeah.
These often reinforced values like loyalty, filial piety.
Incredible. So literacy was definitely widespread enough to support something like that. What about poetry? Did that become more popular too?
It did, yeah. The trend was definitely towards popularization. You had famous haikai poets like Yosubu-san back in the Tenmai era, and then Kobayashi Issa doing Kasei itself.
Okay.
But maybe even more indicative of the popular mood were senryu and kyoka.
What are those?
Senryu are like haiku, 575 syllables, but humorous or satirical. Kyoka are comic walk-up poems, so 57577 syllables.
Comic poetry. That sounds much more approachable for everyday folks.
Exactly. People like Karagromo Kishu, who also went by Otananpo, were big names. It let people play with poetic forms in a lighter way, reflecting their own lives and humor.
So Kasei literature sounds really diverse, long moral epics, travel comedies, witty poems. Something for everyone, almost. Let's switch to the visual side. Ukiyo-e prints. They're so iconic of this era. What was happening in art?
Well, the wider art scene had influences coming in from Ming and Qing China literati painting styles.
Yeah.
And artists like Maruyama Ukiyo were doing realistic painting, even using Western perspective techniques.
Interesting.
But yeah, for the common people, ukiyo-e pictures of the floating world, that was really where it was at. They loved them.
And these started out pretty simple, didn't they? Like single color.
That's right. Hishikawa Marunobu is credited with pioneering them, usually just black ink on paper. Took a while for color to develop.
And then came the really colorful ones.
Yes, during the Tanuma era, which is a bit before Kasei but leads into it. An artist named Suzuki Harunobu came up with multicolored wood block prints. They called them nishiki.
Nishiki-e. Like brocade pictures.
Exactly, because they were so rich and colorful. And producing them was quite a process. It wasn't just one artist.
How did it work?
It was a team effort. You had the painter making the design, then engravers carving separate wood blocks for each color, and finally printers carefully applying the inks and pressing the paper.
Wow, a whole production line.
Yeah. And that collaboration actually made them faster to produce and, importantly, more affordable. So ordinary people could actually buy art. Suzuki Harunobu's print, Beauties Playing the Koto, is a beautiful early example. It really democratized art in a way.
That's amazing. Collaborative art making things accessible. And the subjects weren't just beautiful women, right? Bijinga.
Correct. Bijinga were definitely popular, but ukiyo-e covered other things too, like yakusha prints of kabuki actors.
Ah, like celebrity posters of the day?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And also Fukiga landscape prints.
Who were the big names?
Well, in the late 18th century leading into Kasei, you had Tushusai Shiraku, famous for his really dramatic actor portraits, and Kitagawa Utamaro, known for his incredibly elegant pictures of women.
And then later, the famous landscape artists.
Right. Then came the giants, Katsushika Hokusai and Utagawa Hiroshige. Hokusai, everyone knows for his 36 views of Mount Fuji. That iconic wave print, the Great Wave off Kanagawa, is part of that, though prints like Koshu Kajikazawa are also stunning examples from the series. And Utagawa Hiroshige did the amazing 53 stations of the Tokido series.
Yeah.
Just incredible landscapes.
Now, Hiroshige, I sometimes see him called Ando Hiroshige. You said Utagawa Hiroshige.
Ah, yes, good point. His proper artist name is Utagawa Hiroshige. That Ando thing came from a mistake in an old magazine article way back in the Taisho era. But yeah, scholars and textbooks have pretty much used the correct Utagawa Hiroshige since around the 1990s. His birth name came from his father, Ando Genomon, who was actually a fire brigade official. Hiroshige joined the Utagawa Art School under Utagawa Toyohiro when he was about 15, and that's where he got his art name.
Good to know for accuracy. So, we've got this booming art and literature scene. What about just daily life in the cities, like Edo during Kasei?
It was definitely getting richer, more varied, though, we have to remember there were still big differences in wealth and status among townspeople.
Sure.
But yeah, there was more to do. Lots of theaters, obviously. And these places called Mizamano Goya,
What were they?
kind of like sideshow booths.
Yeah.
You'd see strange exhibits, acrobats, all sorts of curiosities and performances.
Sounds lively.
It was. And performing arts like Rakugo comic storytelling and Kodan reciting historical tales were really taking off. Plus, as we mentioned, more people going to Terakoya, getting educated.
And were there like community events, things that brought people together?
Definitely. Annual events, Ninchukyuji, became more established. Some came down from the aristocracy, like the 5 seasonal festivals, the Goseku. Others spread among everyone.
Like what?
Well, standard things like New Year celebrations, honoring ancestors at the Bon Festival in summer, festivals in spring for good harvests, and then autumn harvest festivals. These shared rituals really built a sense of community.
A shared rhythm to the year.
Exactly. And people loved leisure activities too, going to temple and shrine fairs in Ichi, or seeing special unveilings of sacred statues, kaicho. Lotteries, tomikuji were popular too.
Gambling a bit?
A little bit, yeah. And travel. People travel for hot spring cures, toji, or just for sightseeing, Manamizan. Pilgrimages were huge too.
Where'd they go?
Famous routes like the one to Ice Grand Shrine or visiting the 33 temples in the Kansai region, or the big one, the 88 Temples Pilgrimage in Shikoku.
Wow. So even with the government control, it sounds like Kasei Japan, especially in Edo, was just buzzing with energy and culture from the ground up.
It really was. You see this shift to Edo, literacy spreading, new kinds of books and poems people loved, the explosion of ukiyo-e art, a richer city life, popular religious practices. It was a time when ordinary people's culture truly flourished and, really laid down some important foundations for modern Japan.
Absolutely. And thinking about all that vibrant creativity, all that energy bubbling up, even under quite strict government oversight, it really makes you wonder, doesn't it, about that basic human need to express themselves, to connect, no matter the circumstances. Are there parallels, maybe, other times, other places? Even today, it's definitely something to think about.